Hare Krishna, everyone, and welcome to our fourth class on the Nectar of Instruction. We're going to explore the second verse, the 6 things that spoil one's devotional service, the 6 don'ts. We have the do's and don'ts coming up, but first the don'ts, and then the do's in verse 3. So great to be with all of you. And let's start with a little kirtan.
When Julia comes back, I'm gonna make sure she's muted. For some reason, I'm not able to mute people. Okay, musicians audio on. Oh, all right, grab those cartels. You can play them or Mal can play them. Okay, Haribol, sweet souls, welcome. So come into your comfortable seat, take a few clearing breaths. One more deep breath in. Start with our opening prayers. Shri
Omagyanatimirandhasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurmilitan Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kada Mahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Panchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Santubhya Eva Cha Patitana Pavanebhyo Vaishnavibhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vas Adi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, everyone. Great to see you all. Hope everyone's doing well. My favorite time of the week. So last week we completed the first verse. There was a lot in it. We spent 2.5 weeks pretty much on that verse, and we had a lot of beautiful reflections in the WhatsApp chat. We were kind of just exploring the societal ramifications of the 6 urges and how we had talked previously, and we're going to continue to explore around how we can apply that in our own lives. But we did a little bit of a looking at the kind of like a sober look at society and how the urges that Rupa Goswami says, if you could just regulate these urges, tolerate them, then you can actually be, these are the 6 main things. You can actually be a teacher. They're actually quite the opposite. Especially a lot of people focused on the anger one, how anger is glorified in different contexts. A lot of people were talking about social media and kind of this false idea that because you have a voice, you should just broadcast whatever you're feeling as loudly as possible. And I think one of the things I took away from it, which I was reminded of vividly in my own life this week, is that the end result of having a piece of technology that functions like a graffiti wall is that the loudest voices are the ones that you hear. The loudest voices are the angriest voices, the most kind of like inflamed with the lower modes of nature. Doesn't necessarily mean they're the ones that are worth listening to, even if those voices are our own temporarily. Any other reflections from the last week, and looking at the 6 urges and how they're mismanaged in our society right now, what that means for us before we move into verse 2. Let's take at least one reflection.
I loved how you were talking about how there's these activities, this philosophy, these contemplations, this way of being gives us access to freedom from and freedom to.
Yeah.
Right. And how it's not just one or the other, but
Right.
It's both of them. I really appreciate that. And I think Corey was talking about how like he hasn't felt like restricted by the regulative principles, but that it's allowed him to feel more freedom, which is actually the point of them.
Yeah.
But when we're told you can't do know this, our minds can get to that place of like, I'm not allowed to do things that bring me pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It can be really interesting for the mind to navigate that. And I also just am like week after week overly like wildly impressed by everybody's reflections. And like it's just like incredible to see how you just get it and you get it and you reflect, like you sit with it and you like notice how it resonates with your own heart and how it's really like played out in your own life. And like it's incredible really the wisdom that everyone is sharing, and I'm like blown away by it again and again and again.
Try.
And I think that's like you're a great teacher, and the Shastra is like timeless, and you all are brilliant and sincere and amazing.
Yeah, full credit to the Sangha. I feel, like I said, it's my favorite time of the week.
Yeah, I'm learning and realizing more things about myself and hearing all of your reflections. I'm like, yes, oh yeah.
Yeah.
It's so inspiring.
Yeah, and that bit about freedom from and freedom to, that came out in the context of a discussion around like how do we present these principles,
right?
And have it not be terrifying and religious and weird and rules oriented. And there's a lot there. Like Srila Prabhupada in some places refers to them as the regulative principles of freedom. He uses that terminology. These are the regulative principles of freedom, that by following these principles of regulation, one becomes free. So it's like when you're a kid, you know, and I've used examples so many times, so you know what happened in my real life. When I was a kid, I'll just put in the first person. I went out one Halloween and I got a bunch of candy and I wanted to eat all of it. And my mom sternly forbade me. And she gave me a ration of one piece of candy a night. And in my childish thinking, I was thinking like, you don't love me. You don't care about me at all. Like, why would you do that to me? I definitely want this right now. I've clearly figured out this is the best thing I could do with my energy right now is finish this all. I've totally rubbed up. Why would you stop me? Why would you rein me in like that? Don't you care about me? But of course, she knew that if I did that, I would suffer. And I would look at that empty bag of candy for the next several weeks and bemoan my choices. So she set me up for success by regulating my eating. So it's like we have to be the adult in the room with ourselves. And spiritual culture is accepting spiritual guidance so that we can actually be regulated by somebody who's tried it themselves and knows better. And so it's not about, the childish mind is like, oh, yeah, like that's less pleasure, anything but less pleasure, but it's actually more pleasure. The whole point of the regulative principles of freedom is that it frees us up to experience more pleasure. Not necessarily right away and not necessarily the way we think, which is the tricky part, but definitely in the end. And and Krishna even gave that in the Bhagavad Gita. Pleasure in the mode of happiness in the mode of goodness feels like poison in the beginning. God, I have to only have one piece of chocolate. You're the worst. And feels like nectar in the end. You know, like 4 weeks later when I'm still like polishing off that bag of Halloween chocolate, I just thought, my mom's a genius. Here it is, it's still here. So, mode of goodness, thank you. Thanks for that reflection. And I definitely agree that there's a lot of really good reflections coming out. And that's part of why I do this, is so I can get enlivened, but also so we can all get enlivened by each other and even realize how there's wisdom within ourselves when we really reflect on these principles. Because it's like taking our life experience and putting it side by side with the scripture and the knowledge of the acharyas and being like, oh, actually, like I did learn this thing one time, and it's actually something that Rupa Goswami is talking about. And yeah, and so when you share that, it becomes crystallized for you and also for everyone else.
Can I say one other thing?
Yeah.
I'm sorry for hugging, but I also really appreciated how we so openly and respectfully like talked about sex life within spiritual practice and within bhakti, and you know how to approach it in a way that is not shame inducing, that's like changing the way we look at it within society. And Tanya mentioned like even sexual abuse, that misconduct that happens, and how it's something that needs to actually be discussed and seen through a spiritual lens too. So I feel like that's not often talked about in spiritual circles. So I appreciate that it happened here.
Yeah, just kind of demystifying.
Yeah.
And removing the shame and the weirdness around it.
Yeah.
As long as it's discussed respectfully, then it's got to be discussed because it's a part of life, and it's always going to be. I mean, biologically, it's like strictly necessary for the propagation of the species. Like that's a fundamental thing. In fact, the scripture says that the fundamental things that all living beings do is eating, taking things in, fearing or defending, and sleeping, resting, like rejuvenating, and mating, procreating. And so like animals, plants, humans, that's just the biological thing. So until such time as we're completely transcendental to the whole biological machine, it's part of life. And so it's an energy to be reckoned with soberly. And there's a lot of guidance from our teachers on that, lots. Because as always, this tradition is super like eyes open, practical. Chai. All right, so with that, unless we have any other reflections we'd like to bring in. Okay, so with that, I'll go into verse 2. And I'll share the screen. It's a great verse. Beautiful one to memorize, because there's just like 6, these are all really good ones to memorize, actually. 6 points, like the last verse. Atyahar prayasascha prajalpo niyamagraha janasangascha laulyangsha shalpir bhaktir vinashyati. One's devotional service is spoiled when they become too entangled in the following 6 activities. 1, eating more than necessary or collecting more funds than required. 2, over-endeavoring for mundane things that are very difficult to obtain. 3, talking unnecessarily about mundane subject matters. 4, and 4 is a 2-for-1, because it's right there in the Sanskrit. You can actually break it down in 2 different ways. Practicing the scriptural rules and regulations only for the sake of following them, and not for the sake of spiritual advancement, or rejecting the rules and regulations of Scripture and working independently or whimsically. 5, associating with worldly-minded persons who are not interested in Krishna consciousness. And 6, being greedy for mundane achievements. So we heard about the 6 urges, body and mind, anger, and so forth, speech, in the first verse. And so we're getting into like basically activities, the activities that are really favorable and unfavorable. And we start with unfavorable in verse 2. We'll get into favorable in verse 3. So we're going to pretty much look at the first 3 of them today. That's my goal, just putting it out there. So get to the first 3, and then the next 3 next week. And so the first one, ati ahara. Ati ahara, ahara means to eat. Ati means too much. So it's literally overeating. But as Bhaktivinoda Thakur points out, I'll be referring to Bhaktivinoda Thakur's commentary on this verse as well as Srila Prabhupada's, because Bhaktivinoda Thakur, great Acharya, he's the father of Srila Prabhupada's guru, and his Srila Prabhupada's like great-grandfather guru, and amazing devotee. He also wrote an essay on verses 2 and 3 of the Nectar of Instruction. So for these 2 verses, we'll have access to his wisdom as well as Srila Prabhupada's. As he points out, Atyahara literally means to overeat, but that was addressed in the first verse. Vacha vegam manasakrodha vegam jihva vegam udarapasa, the tongue and the belly, tasting and filling your belly. So according to the Sanskrit principles of poetry and prose, you wouldn't just repeat something unnecessarily. So there is the sense of overeating, but we've already talked about that. So I'll just mention briefly again that eating more than necessary actually can ruin one's devotional practice. Prabhupada talks about it here. Right. If a bag of rice is placed in a public place, birds will come to eat a few grains and go away. A human being, however, will take the whole bag away. They will eat all their stomach can hold and then try to keep the rest in storage. So the capacity to like overeat is there for us, and it isn't in a way for animals so much. Like generally in their natural environment, if they're not interfered with, animals can't really overeat. Sometimes pets can if they're exposed to like food that they wouldn't have in their natural environment, or humans can overfeed them and stuff. But the general principle is that they have a natural regulating agency, and scientists call this instinct, and we call it Paramatma. The super soul says, start eating, stop eating, right? Especially the higher forms of life, like they naturally regulate. But humans can act in an unregulated way, and so overeating is a possibility for us, actually, in a much more systematic way. We can systematically overeat, actually. So that's one of the meanings of atyahara. Another meaning, and Bhaktivinoda Thakur talks about, is to take in more than you need. Just like you can take in more than you need through your mouth, you can take in more than you need in other ways. So he mentions in one place, if one accepts sense objects in the spirit of enjoyment, that is atyahara. If they are accepted as the Lord's mercy, and only as far as required, then yukta vairagya is easily attained. Yukta vairagya means to be detached through practical application. So like yukta vairagya means to accept something, not in the principle of enjoying for oneself only, but in a mood of connection to the Lord. Yukta actually is related to the same Sanskrit root as the word yoga. Yoga means to connect. Yukta means that which is connected. So yukta vairagya means when you can have an experience of detachment from selfishness and selfish pleasure through connection, through connecting it to the Lord. So he's saying that if one accepts the objects of the senses as the Lord's mercy, not as things for me to enjoy, but as connected to the Lord, and one accepts them as much as required, not less, not more, then you can easily stay in this position of yukta vairagya, practical renunciation, practical renunciation. And Krishna talks about this in the 6th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. I'll pull up the verse. Many of us studied this recently in this very Sangha. 6:17 yuktahara viharasya yukta cheshtasya karmasya yukta swapnavabodhasya yogo bhavati dukkha. Again, this word yukta, connected, regulated. One who's regulated in their habits of eating, sleeping, recreation, and work can mitigate their material pains by practice of the yoga system. So again, this regulation is the way we can actually mitigate or lessen our suffering. You have to eat. You have to have some ahara. You have to have some vihara, some recreation, some cheshta, and some karma. You have to have some activities, and you have to have some rest. And so all those things have to be there. But specifically in terms of like eating or taking in things, receiving, we're actually doing that all the time, right? That's why we have all these senses. We can take in so many things. And one of the labels for this age we're living in is the information age, because it's characterized by practically unlimited access to information. Kishore and I were having a conversation with the AI bot Alexa today, and I was just amazed at how my life has become like a sci-fi movie because of instantaneous voice activated access to like all of Wikipedia and whatever Google and search engine she's using to, siphon down knowledge. And like how short of a time ago that would have been considered, like scholars I had to go to the library when I was a kid to look things up and in encyclopedias before the internet. And it's like the information ages means we can take in so much at any time, especially with the invention of the smartphone. And we can do that wherever we want to. We can do it to whatever degree we want to. We can take in audio, visual content. So the capacity for ahara consumption is practically unlimited. In fact, you will never reach even the end of 1/1,000,000% of the amount of information that you can have access to in your entire life, even if you try and you never sleep. So don't try. But
tell them what Alexa said to your question of what has love got to do with it.
No, I'll pass on that. I'll pass on that for now. But the point is that this is the information age, and we can take in so much. And so 500 years ago, Rupa Goswami is talking about yukta ahara. He's talking about avoiding ati ahara, overeating or over collecting, right? So taking in too much food, taking in too much information, becoming too distracted. Another meaning of ati ahara Prabhupada talks about, I'll quote him at this point because good to hear from him always. The main problem confronting the conditioned souls is the repetition of birth, old age, disease, and death. Everyone requires possessions such as food, grains, clothing, money, and other things necessary for the maintenance of the body, but one should not collect more than necessary for their actual basic needs. If this natural principle is followed, there will be no difficulty in maintaining the body. So collection, over collecting. So you can think about like ownership of objects. Sometimes we have there's this phenomenon of hiring people to declutter your home because it gets to be a real problem. We all exchange so many gifts so many times a year, and you don't have the heart to throw them out, even if they may or may not be useful. And so many cards and so many knickknacks, and everyone has a drawer, which becomes a large drawer, which becomes a cabinet full of things that they don't know where else to put in their house. And so I actually have a friend whose entire job it is, and she's quite good at it. And her job is to help people take things out of their home, to purge the things they don't need when they actually accept that this is a problem for me. Maybe like someone in the family passes away and they have to process all the things that came along with a lifetime of possessions, right? And so over collecting can manifest in that way. And so we're getting really advice and support here to think about what it means to over collect. And the lens that comes up to help us understand what over-collecting is it more than necessary for our life, especially in terms of our essential life as devotees? Like, does it support our devotional service? Is it neutral to that devotional service, or is it actually unfavorable for that devotional service? Like, for example, kind of obvious, but I'll put it up there. If you are living in a space in which there is this phenomenon of, as one professional purger of extra paraphernalia called it, visual noise. If you have visual noise in your space, then just by entering that space, you become distracted. How can we have a life in the mode of goodness when, as soon as you enter a room, in your safe space in the universe, your home, your apartment, your little corner, there's visual noise, right? It's very difficult. It's very difficult to focus because the more you take on, the more you're responsible for. On one level or another, the more you're responsible for, either as an object or an idea or a relationship or an attachment or a financial or legal obligation, family, over collecting, right? So, and Prabhupada, it's interesting because he talks about how people can misunderstand this, that I'll just quote him. He says here, if people are advised not to collect too many goods, eat too much, or work unnecessarily to possess artificial amenities, they think they are being advised to return to a primitive way of life. Generally, people do not like to accept plain living and high thinking. That is their unfortunate position. So one of the challenges we find to the idea of regulating atyahara, over collecting, is that there's this kind of black and white thinking. Have you ever experienced this in yourself or in others? Is like, oh, I can't do that. I can't live in the Stone Age. I like hot showers. I like soap. So who's asking you to not take showers? Who's asking you to like go back to, it's this kind of like, how do I put it? Just like this emotional response to the idea of regulation is that, oh, but society is actually advanced. So therefore it's my responsibility to like take as much as I can, because to not do that would be to live in an uncivilized, backwards way. Like my health will be worse, my mental health will be worse. It's like, it's founded on just fear of actually like cutting back. And it doesn't really stand up to any scrutiny, because if we look at our modern lives, we can see that in the 21st century, any practically lower middle class person in a developed country has a standard of life that exceeds that of any royalty from 200 years ago. And it's not close in terms of your access to food and luxuries. And if you don't have like, AI bots answering you on voice activation, you do have, I'm almost positive everyone has access to search engines, the internet. So free information, free libraries. You can have avocados in the middle of winter. It's not nothing. This is like, there's a lot of work has gone into providing all those things. Just like a simple middle class or even lower than middle class lifestyle is tremendously luxurious by many, many standards across the span of human history. And it's also demonstrably not created in and of itself spiritual happiness. It's not enough to do that. Notably, we're not asked to live like in the dirt. In his commentary on this section, Bhaktivinoda Thakur repeatedly talks about how the regulations around not over collecting and not associating unnecessarily with worldly minded persons, etc., they apply differently depending on your order of life. If you're a renunciate, like I first read Bhaktivinoda Thakur's commentary to this section when I was a brahmachari, a student monk. And I'm reading it again now in more of the grihastha phase of life, where it's like, you're in the world, you're a householder, you're actually maintaining a home for the purposes of your service, but also that's your dharma, that's your prescribed duty. You have a certain prescription, you're allowed to do that. So he's stressing that for the renunciate, collecting practically anything at all is considered unnecessary. Like when I was a student monk, to have access to a smartphone for the purposes of staying in touch with people that I distributed Bhagavad Gitas to and answer their questions, to like text my guru. This was quite revolutionary. Like for thousands and thousands of years, renunciates did not collect anything. Our line is actually like very permissive to even allow that much. Like I would have a laptop and use it to go on Vedabase and read Srimad Bhagavatam. But renunciates are actually advised traditionally to have nothing, because it's a great luxury to not have to deal with any of that. But even renunciates in this age can't actually do that. You have to have a certain amount of engagement in the world. I had a phone number and so forth. I had a bank account. What to speak of householders? So when it comes to this kind of like fearful thinking of, oh, I can't give it all up, you're not being asked to. Even Bhaktivinoda Thakur didn't do that. He had a job. He had 10 kids, 11 kids, 10 kids. He had a wife, had a home. We've got to believe he celebrated birthdays and sent mail, and we know he wrote, and he had friends and neighbors, and he was in the world. And so it's a trap to start thinking like, oh, regulation is just like this very slippery slope into like the Stone Age. It's like, no, it's actually a way of protecting us from what's basically, I would argue, a runaway train. The modern impetus to collect is not actually a conscious urge. It's feeding a subconscious urge. It's feeding like our inner child that wants to eat all the candy on Halloween night. It's therefore it's always going to have an audience, because we always have that inner child, inner kind of sugar junkie. But it doesn't actually require to be there. It wasn't there for so long. This massive acceleration in our capacity to take things in, and if you think about it, it's created a lot of trouble. So I'll pause there on the point of Atyahara. We'll take any comments and questions or reflections on what Atyahara means, our charge is saying, or what it means to you. Anything that stood out from this particular thing to be avoided?
I was really appreciate how Prabhupada mentions in the commentary here, and it's in other places, of plain thinking or plain living, high thinking, or
Right.
simple living, high thinking. And thinking about it like that is just, there's less clutter in your external environment. There's less clutter in your mind. If you're not too full or not eating enough, right? There can be more contentment. Both of those allow for there to be more like equanimity, and they're more sattva.
Right.
Like it makes sense, but we don't live in a world where we live simply for the most part.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, I gave the example earlier when we were reflecting on last week about anger and social media, like the unstated kind of like principle of social media is that whatever you say is important, right? And our acharyas are basically saying not to not speak, not to not eat, not to not collect, but to be discriminating, use discrimination and all of those things, and see what is the level at which, and you can actually feel it. Like, there's this expression, doom scrolling. Get on your phone, you start doom scrolling through like your like Facebook or whatever. I guess these days is more like TikTok and Instagram. And it's like your brain just shuts down. You can feel it. Oh wow, like I don't need any more of this. Turn it off, put it down. The modes of nature change. It's not, there's a point at which it ceases to be useful. So even like people who are trying to be like a little bit regulated in the world have recognized that limiting your screen time, for example, not over collecting bits and bytes of data into the eyes and brain is really helpful, because it sits with you.
Right.
You can't go to sleep and you start like worrying about all the situations in the world, and you have all these things on your mind and you're constantly distracted. It's like, yeah, because you've been doom scrolling. You've been like collecting all this information unnecessarily. So these are actually very relevant, very, very applicable. People who are a little bit, not even spiritual, but just a little bit sattvic have talked about.
Yeah.
Turn off your phone, a couple hours before you go to bed, so that the light doesn't, keep you awake, and all that information. So yeah, you can just unwind, pick up a book, read by candlelight. How about that? Read by a lamp. Turn off the LED, so forth.
Right, so being discerning or discriminating, as you said, or intentional, conscious in our choices. And the thing that is wild is when you're not like that, like you don't even realize that you're doing scrolling anymore. Like
Yeah.
that just like becomes the norm. And that is like really something that
Yeah.
is scary.
Like if you look on
Majority of the world.
on public transportation, like what people are doing most of the time is just looking at their phone,
Mhm.
you know? And before that particular piece of technology was so prevalent, they had to do something else. You know, it's like we all have the same amount of time, right? Like one very practical application of not over collecting or overtaking in, when you chant your japa, turn off your phone, turn it right off, put it on airplane mode, put it on the other side of the room. So you can't receive anything and you can't be distracted. And if your mind starts to put up a fuss, like I got to look this thing up, you got to get up and go across the room to get it. Like, make it difficult. Give yourself permission to just take in the names. Give yourself permission to just receive that, to just doom scroll Krishna's name. Just like be present with that and binge on that. And that's actually like healthy, and not allowing ourselves to multitask when we're doing things that are important. It's just like if I'm talking to you, right? Like let's say, Kishore, I'm having a conversation with you, you're talking to me, and like, so say something important to me that needs my attention, and just gauge my response and see how it makes you feel. Go ahead.
Can you remember to take out the trash and recycling? Oh,
Sorry, with that, I'm listening to you. Go ahead.
I don't think you are listening.
Yeah, no, something about take out the what? Yeah, I'm listening to you.
No, you're not. Okay. Do you think that you could take out the trash and recycling and that?
You can feel that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It's multitasking.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to
feel
do too many things. I'm trying to read while I'm listening to Kishore. It doesn't work. I can't do either of them properly. I feel embarrassed just putting on that pantomime, and I've been guilty of it so many times. You know, it's part of our culture. So
Yeah.
like when you really value something, it's like, okay, you know what? Close the laptop. I'm with you.
Mhm.
Right. And then it's like, whatever you're doing, just do that. That's also not over collecting. It's like, I'm not going to try to like manage some kind of giant juggling act. I'm on the phone, but I'm also typing things out. And I'm also like, yeah, writing my memoirs over here, but I'm eating. And I'm also brushing my teeth with the other hand. It's like, come on, it doesn't work.
It's mindfulness 101.
Yeah. So that's also just part of sattvic living.
I really appreciate how you just said, also not over collecting on information.
Yeah.
You know, like, right?
Yeah.
With social media, even like we can even overdo that with things that are like quote unquote beneficial, right?
Oh, yeah.
So, right. So it's like
Srila Prabhupada talked about that. He said, you know, I have written all these books, but my disciples are some of my disciples are going, when they go to India, and they're becoming very attracted to these austere Sanskrit literatures. They're in other words, they were jumping over Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, Nectar of Instruction, and they're finding some like Sanskrit dictionary somewhere, or like some obscure text. It's like, even if that's a devotional book, which there are many wonderful devotional books, Srila Prabhupada's a genius. He already put these things in his books. Like, did you read Bhagavad Gita yet? Did you even bother to read the 12 cantos of Bhagavatam? So there's a way in which like we can start reading even Shastra just to look good, or to like, I've memorized all these verses just to show off. And it's like that same over collecting capacity can come up even there, what to speak of in the material realm with material things.
And even if it's of good intention, I want to learn, but if you're taking in too much, are you learning it?
Yeah.
Right? Like, are you able to actually digest the
Yeah.
teachings of the Gita?
There was one great acharya, one of Srila Prabhupada's godbrothers, who would not read the next verse of the Bhagavad Gita until he felt he'd realized the verse he was on.
Wow.
He would like read it and meditate on it and sit on it and think about it and talk about it. Maybe probably journaling about it and praying about it. And he'd only move on to the next one when he felt that he'd digested something. The Lord had given him something about it. I'm not saying that's the only way to read, but it's certainly a bona fide way to read, you know. It's also completely bona fide to just read systematically, even if you don't completely get it. It's all good. They're both wonderful, but yeah, over collecting.
find one thing interesting, if I may.
Yes.
So, over collecting things, material things,
Right.
been linked to, depression, anxiety, and trauma. People that are unhappy. I'm going to control these things because I can't control anything else. But
Yeah.
those things don't actually make them happy, right? Obviously. But I just thought it was interesting, in my own life, as I get more and more self-realized, I realize I don't need these things. And I need to call your friend that does that for a living and purge my house. Like, but seriously, like, I just thought it was an interesting concept, because the things don't bring you happiness, but it's actually linked in a lot of cases to depression.
Yeah, as both a cause and a symptom.
Mm-hmm.
It can be depressing to have an overly attached lifestyle with too many things. And as you pointed out, when one is also already suffering on the mental, emotional level, then one can seek solace in the process of collecting. It's like it's like emotional eating, right? That's everyone has experienced that to some degree. So emotional collecting, emotional shopping. It's just it's a very easy way to quickly kind of like change our experience of the world, and but it's a really shallow way. It doesn't really do much.
Fill a God-sized shaped hole in our hearts.
Right. So yeah, good point.
Yeah.
Or points.
Allison, Heather.
I was just thinking about what you said about multitasking, and just throughout my life, how you're almost rewarded for being a multitasker. And like, as a stay-at-home mom with 4 kids, well, if I could take care of the kids and get dinner and drive and now I'm thinking, was I ever really in one place? You're just doing so many things at one time, but yet you would hear people say, oh, well, she's a great multitasker. She can do so many things in the house. And it's just, now looking back, it just makes me reflect back on so many things. And was I ever really in one place and being present in that moment?
Yeah, and I think that's a good spot to make a little bit of a comment about society that we're in. Srila Prabhupada was quite forceful on that, and I think we have a right to be a little bit forceful too. I read one thinker describing it this way. This is a woman. She was talking about the expectations that women have to face. They're expected to make money and perform in the corporate realm as if they have no children, and raise their children as if they have no job, but they're expected to do both. And it's completely unfair. And that was their perspective on the expectations of not just women's expectations in this world are like that, but there's the society we've allowed to be created around us is quite warped in its expectations. It's almost impossible sometimes to be present because you're disincentivized from it. It's considered normal. You're supposed to be juggling things all the time. But as we pointed out, as I showed with our little thought experiment, or, practical experiment with Kishori, it's painful. It's painful to always be juggling things. It was painful for me, and it was painful for her. And it's dehumanizing. So part of the cost of over collecting and trying to do too much, which is going to come up later, because over endeavor is the next one. Prayasa, over endeavor. Part of the cost of that is that you ask yourself, as you said, was I ever really present for any of that? Yeah. That's a good segue. Atyahara prayasaha. Prayasaha means over endeavor. Endeavoring for things that are, well, let's see how Prabhupada puts it. Okay. Even though we require economic development, true religion allows it only for supplying the bare necessities of material existence. Jiva sa tattva jignasa. The real purpose of life is to inquire about the absolute truth. If our endeavor, our prayasa, is not to inquire about the absolute truth, we will simply increase our endeavor to satisfy our artificial needs. A spiritual aspirant should avoid mundane endeavor. So I think we touched on this principle of mundane endeavor a little bit with the comment around, like, part of the discussion around trying to do a bunch of things at the same time. So part of avoiding prayasa, over endeavor, mundane endeavor, is simplifying what we consider the goals in our lives. Like, for example, one useful thought experiment I've done for myself, and I've had other people do, like when they work with me one-on-one or just like for friends and stuff, is like write down a list of the things that you really want out of life, you know? And it doesn't matter whether you think you should want it or you shouldn't want it, just actually write it down. And if you're really honest about that, which is the challenging part of the exercise, being truly honest about whatever you want on any level, including Halloween candy, everything, like deep wants, shallow wants, you look at it, it's a long list of various things. And as soon as you admit that you want something, you admit that you're already working for that in some way or another. In your life, you're actually connected to all those things you want because you're endeavoring for every one of them. Consciously or unconsciously is up to you. Whether you consciously endeavor for them or you unconsciously endeavor for them, you are endeavoring for respect, attention, affection, connection, food, sex, travel, money, spiritual goal, all these things that we could possibly want, we're endeavoring for all of them because that's what we are. We're like little attention, units of attention. We put our attention on something and then move towards it. So the prayasa is like simplifying, like pruning. Is that what they call it? With plants?
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, like this is the main thing. I want you to grow over here. All this other stuff isn't necessary. We're going to prune you down. And it actually, if you do it right, gardeners can tell you it's good for the plant because all that extra energy that's being put into all these other branches gets put into a single place. And again, Krishna talked about that in the Bhagavad Gita. Just remember this nice verse from the 2nd chapter. And this relates to prayasa, over endeavor. Find it. Yes, 241. Those who are on this path of yoga are resolute in purpose and their aim is one. O Arjuna, the intelligence of those who are irresolute is many branched. So when you're resolved, when you're focused, then your aim is also focused, and so your endeavor is also focused. So there is this kind of like pretty much universal experience that people have when they come to Krishna consciousness. You know, Tanya, you were talking about this, like simplifying your space. It happens to everybody. Simplifying your space, but also simplifying our endeavors, what we try for, what we want, what we consider useful goals changes. And so our endeavors, our profile of what we do with our human energy also should change, right? So the admonition or warning against prayasa, over endeavor, is to that effect. It's like, one analogy you can think of, you know, there's this thing called the gambler's fallacy. The idea that, oh, but I've already lost so much, so I should keep putting money into this because I'll win eventually, right? Like if you have a car and it's a lemon, as they say, it's not a good car. Like the nature of that car is that it's always demanding repairs and you're putting a lot of money into it. It's like the sunken cost fallacy. Like I've already put this much into it. I have to keep endeavoring for this. I have to, like I'm priced into it emotionally, financially. So there's a social cost. What will it look like if I stop doing this? I'll be a loser. I'll be considered a failure, you know? But prayasa means recognizing what is actually like, when it's actually time to step away from the table. I don't want to gamble this. This is just dumb. The house always wins. I got to sell this car. It's just a sink. I have to drop this part of my life. This is just a toxic relationship or a toxic business venture or something that's just not good for me, right? And pruning that tree is like, yeah, they may be relevant once. I'm decreasing my profile there. I'm simplifying my spectrum of activities. that is in harmony with this principle of not over endeavoring, right?
Mhm.
Let me now check what Bhaktivinoda Thakur and Srila Prabhupada have said about that. Oh yeah, Bhaktivinoda Thakur said a lot of good things about that.
Mhm.
So he points out that one's endeavor for that's related to one's duties in the world, like one's svadharma, their natural occupational duties. Endeavoring for that doesn't really qualify as prayasa. It doesn't qualify as over endeavor because it's part of what you're given as your what's the word?
Yes.
It's part of your
Offering. Service. Is it Sanskrit or English?
English. Anyway,
Proclivities.
it's like what you're allowed to have.
Oh yeah. Your allotment.
Yeah, your allotment. You're allotted that. That's why, Arjuna's whole thing in Bhagavad Gita is, what is my duty? What am I supposed to do? Right? Because the culture he's from was very duty oriented. And he knew that if you do your duty, you're basically protected. Even if you kind of don't know why you're doing it, at least you're like doing your duty. Because someone else who did know what you're supposed to do helped you to focus on that. And you're just doing that. At least it's better than just acting whimsically. And Krishna says it a couple times in Bhagavad Gita, better to do your own duty imperfectly than to try to do someone else's duty perfectly. So if you have a child, you have a duty to the child. It's a very important function of life. Like you have a responsibility. So taking care of the child is not prayasa. It's never prayasa to take care of your child. It's not over endeavor. It's a sacred duty. It's there in scripture, and so in other words, like knowing what our position in life is, and knowing like what we have to do to put food on the table, to take care of our dependents, what are actually our ordained duties are, is helpful, because when we're endeavoring in those realms, we should understand that that's not subject to like this prayasa thing so much. We can over endeavor in those realms for sure, but we do have to endeavor a certain amount, and we can't not endeavor. Bhaktivinoda Thakur stresses that. He says a couple of really interesting things here. I'll just mention them because I thought they were really interesting and brilliant. He says, the hard labor for activities like visiting holy places is prayasa, that is unfavorable for devotional service. If, however, one goes to the places of Krishna's pastimes with a greedy desire to awaken their love for Krishna and to associate with devotees, that is devotional service, not useless prayasa, not useless over endeavor. Even pilgrimages can be over endeavor if one does it in like a touristy mode of mind. This is actually devotional service. He says, the endeavor for serving the Vaishnavas, devotees, is not prayasa, because greed to associate with one's own peers destroys faults in the form of your desires to associate with worldly minded people. So like going out of your way to associate with devotees, to the work you have to do to be part of a sangha and to serve a sangha, is not prayasa. That's also a safe space to apply as much energy as you want to, because you have to associate with somebody. And so as we'll see later in the verse, jana sangha, to be intimately connected to worldly association, is detrimental for spiritual advancement. So applying endeavor in that realm has limited returns, diminishing returns, but applying endeavor in the realm of associating with devotees is actually a great place. It's like really, really good investment, not like your lemon car. It's the opposite.
So spiritualize your endeavors, and then it's not over endeavoring. Spiritualize
your endeavors. That's what a service is, right? Like this service I'm doing, a giving class, I like to read. It's natural for me. I like knowledge, right? So I'm just reading Prabhupada's books. I'm reading Shastra, and I've been doing that for some years now. And I get to apply myself in endeavoring to understand that, think about it, discuss it, share it with others. Like I would do that. Just like Arjuna was going to do his thing. Krishna's like, you think you're not going to fight, but you're going to fight. You're a fighter. So I can't not talk about knowledge. It's just who I am. But because I'm using that endeavor with these books, I get to have a spiritual experience. Other people get supported in the spiritual experience because it's just bhakti. You know,
Mhm.
there's no over endeavoring. There's no like reading too many devotional books in a thoughtful way. That doesn't happen. If you're like reading under guidance, it's like you can read forever, no problem. You can't have too much kirtan, etc. Those are some thoughts on prayasa. Like Bhaktivinoda Thakur says, the prayasa or endeavor for activities like sankirtan, congregational chanting, is only meant to open one's heart to chanting the Lord's holy names. It is therefore extremely natural, etc. So lots of beautiful details here. I can't even read all of them, but we'll take now any thoughts and reflections on prayasa over endeavor.
For me, one of the things that springs to mind is pre-bhakti was my obsession with fitness. How much time I put into that, and not missing a workout, and it just is something that for years, probably the last maybe not the last 2 years, but prior to that, 10 years prior. And going to India, we went 3 weeks without working out, and to me, like a couple of years ago, that would have just been mind-boggling. I couldn't imagine it. And so it's just been amazing to see that shift. And as I've gotten deeper and deeper into bhakti, how that I like working out. It's something but it's just something I do. It's become just like another thing. And I put that time that I used to put into fitness into bhakti and learning and growing as a person. So it's been a big change in me over the past few years. So
Fantastic. People ask me what I do, for a living or occupationally, and one way I describe it is I'm a spiritual fitness coach. We're actually all little spiritual fitness coaches in our lives. That's a lot of what bhakti is. Nothing wrong with keeping the engine and the body strong. That's part of our culture. But you're talking about like this phenomenon, and I've seen it, is that people put their confidence and their faith and their trust in their body. Like, if I can just control that, everything will be okay. I'll be really happy.
It is a form of religion. It becomes that. It becomes
yeah. And it can manifest like if I look a certain way, or it can manifest if I can perform athletically or in a gym.
Yeah. It's a little bit of both for sure. So.
Yeah.
CrossFit, I'm wondering.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
and then running too, and then a lot of running too.
Yeah, there's a verse in the Srimad Bhagavatam. I'm trying to remember the Sanskrit for it right now. It's described that people have these fallible soldiers. The soldiers in the form of their family, their own body, their health, and they think that those soldiers are going to guard their best interests, and they put their entire faith in them. But they're fallible, and so they fail them. And so the idea that if I can just like manage this perfect physical condition, I can look and feel and perform a certain way in this body, then all my problems will be solved. It's like, that's doomed to failure. And that's coming from somebody who, like, I absolutely try to take care of my body, and I've been advised to do so. And all of our acharyas did. Like Srila Prabhupada, at one point, he was a very elderly gentleman when he came to the West. He had a couple of heart attacks. After one, the doctor mentioned to him that you should really walk regularly. And Srila Prabhupada took that as really good advice, and he did that every day from then on. He had his morning walk, and many of our conversations and wisdom from Srila Prabhupada would come on those morning walks. He would go with his japa bag, the devotees would go with him, chant japa, and he would pause and talk about Krishna consciousness and philosophy and the application, the world, and this and that, and current events in the light of all that. And he would walk briskly, I would say. In fact, his young disciples had difficulty keeping up with him, because he was, like, everything he did with vigor. So it's important to take care of yourself, but
there's a lot of good YouTube videos of that you can watch.
Yeah, Prabhupada walking.
Yeah.
But the walking was in service to keep the machine strong. It's like, eat to live, don't live to eat, right? So exercise to live, don't live to exercise. It's like all these things that are in the mode of goodness or part of a normal life, like eating and exercise and association and recreation, they're there to keep us fit and happy. And Srila Prabhupada even described gratifying one's senses as salt. Just like you have to have some salt in your meal, he said if there's too much salt, it's no good. And if there's too little salt, also no good. You have to have a little salt, right? You have to have a little bit of like salt and spice and just a little bit of nonsense, just a little bit of nonsense, not too much, just enough like joking and recreation. All that stuff's fine. But if you start like making jokes and recreation, or even something as sattvic as working out and being in good shape your life, then it quickly becomes prayasa, over endeavor. Any more reflections on prayasa? Okay. So, atyahara prayasascha prajalpo. Prajalpa. Oh, we have something in chat. 1 second. New charades prompt Sanskrit or English, right? Yeah, we're learning a lot of Sanskrit here. Prajalpa. Srila Prabhupada talks about that. Another impediment is prajalpa, unnecessary talking. So we talk about like, in fact, so far already we've talked about vachovegam, the first urge was the urge to speak. So prajalpa is pretty much this misapplication of the talking. Bhaktivinoda Thakur talks about this as well. He scrolls down. Oh, I'm scrolling down just to find his commentary on that. 1 second. Okay. So godless prajalpa is an impediment to devotional service. Discussions that don't actually have any connection to spiritual activity or spiritual life or spiritual source. They are of many types. Useless talks, arguments, gossip, debates, fault finding in others, speaking falsehoods, blaspheming others, like criticizing or criticizing devotees, and worldly talk. Useless talk is extremely detrimental. Interesting, he points out like arguments and debates are useless, right? I think this is a good spot to share a little tidbit of knowledge I have around what our tradition has to say about debates, because it's actually pretty relevant if you think about like the discourse that comes up. Anytime there's a disagreement, like, you'll see this in the political arena, but you also see it when people disagree, especially online. So according to our tradition, like anything can be done in any of the modes of nature, debates in the mode of goodness happen when both parties are interested in the truth. Steve and I want to understand the truth on something. Maybe he has a different opinion than me. I have a different opinion than him. However, the point is, in a mode of goodness debate, he knows that I want the truth. I know that he wants the truth. And we can converse on that level, even if we disagree. Lower than that is, I want to be right. That's the mode of passion, right? If all of a sudden, instead of mutually seeking out the truth, one or both members of this conversation debate starts being motivated by just wanting to prove themselves right, that's lower, right? You can see this in discussions. When the discussion gets to a point where you can feel the other person will say anything just to justify that they're right, or you find that tendency in yourself is like there's this defensiveness, you have to be right, then it's not actually about the truth anymore. It's just about your sectarian position, like, because it's my idea, therefore it has to be right. And in the mode of ignorance, I don't care what happens, I just want to take them down. So smear campaigns, I mean, God bless them, but political propaganda has gotten to be the mode of ignorance the last couple of decades. This is really just like some quickly worded commercial about how the person's rival is actually just a scumbag and you should never vote for them because they're actually the second coming of Adolf Hitler or whatever awful thing, just awful propaganda. That's in the mode of ignorance. It's like, you should lose. I want to hurt you. Personal attacks, sarcasm. And then mode of passion is, I want to win. I have to be right. And I'll prove that. I'll prove I'm right. Mode of goodness is, I don't care if I'm right or wrong. I actually want to know what's real here. What's true? Do you have something to offer me that can expand my vision of what's really true about this topic? And can I share something with you? Can we come away enlivened and have a mutual expansion of growth, right? That's mode of goodness. Actually, higher than that is if you actually hear submissively from somebody who has spiritual knowledge, just like Arjuna did from Krishna. In the beginning of Bhagavad Gita, he's like, I don't even know what's going on. I surrender to you because I just trust you, Krishna. Please help me. Now he did that with Krishna, so it was actually the highest form of jalpa, of conversation. So when it comes to this injunction against prajalpa, it's important to see what our intentions are in a conversation. Is this person a spiritual authority? And am I receiving from them? That's the highest thing, highest vibration. Am I like sincerely seeking after truth here? Lower, but still good. Am I just trying to be right? Or am I actually just vindictive, angry, bitter? Like, what is happening? So there's a spectrum there, the modes, and there's therefore a spectrum of usefulness. So we see that in Bhaktivinoda Thakur talking about fault finding or speaking falsehoods or criticizing. These are all forms of prajalpa. If one doesn't have the service of correcting others, then don't take it up. Don't voluntarily take up the service of finding fault with others unless it's given to you, because it's really heavy. It's a heavy responsibility to have to correct other people. If it's not given to you, then just enjoy the fact that you don't have to think about other people's faults, because it's a really heavy burden to carry around, to have to like tell someone they're wrong. What to speak of telling other people how wrong that person is, like fault finding, gossiping. It's useless. And it just serves the false egos, like, because I get to point out how they're wrong, even if they are, I can feel better about myself because at least I'm not them. I didn't make that mistake, right? These are all just ways we become servants of our own false ego, and it's prajalpa. It's useless. So the ideal thing is to do what we're doing right now. Read the Nectar of Instruction and talk about how it applies to our lives and think about it and discuss that and discuss Krishna directly. That's the best thing we can do. And to the extent that we can't do that we can't, like, we don't have a taste for just talking about Nectar of Instruction all day long, all week long, then we should try to see what mode of nature are we in, Am I just am I memorizing the bits of detail around such and such movie and television show, and like, what was this bit character's name? Or like with my dad, we can talk about 1990s baseball, who played second base for the Blue Jays in 1991. It's like, it's possible to memorize all these details and talk about them. And it's also like really cool to just try to memorize things from the Krishna book instead, and Bhagavad Gita. And because we're gonna do that, we're gonna be like talking about things. So again, using and misusing the talking principle. Any comments on that while I look up more of our Acharya's commentaries on prajalpa?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
For most people in our Sangha, right, not everyone in their life and important people in their life are practicing bhakti, understand Krishna consciousness, have interested in Krishna consciousness, are willing to participate in Krishna consciousness, right, in bhakti. So like that example you gave of communicating with your dad about the Blue Jays and the years and this, like, that's actually, if you're thinking about what mode you're communicating in, and also your intention around what you're doing, why you're talking with him at that level, if you will, or it's like, that's the way that you can connect with him. Right. So therefore it's not what you would rather be talking about all the time, or perhaps it's not your highest level of thinking, but it's how you can connect, and bhakti is also about connection and love. Right?
Yeah.
So like that's why you do it, right?
Yeah. Bhaktivinoda Thakur actually talks about this. He says,
Right, because at work, you know, in all these different places where everybody is, it's like you can't talk about.
yeah, because the renunciates have no business whatsoever with sense enjoyment, they can give up talking about others in all respects. But because the householder is engaged in earning, saving, protecting, and maintaining the family,
Mhm.
they cannot completely give up talking about others. It is best for them to live in a Krishna conscious family. So he's saying that in relationship to the family, we have an obligation. You know,
Mhm.
maintaining the family doesn't just mean maintaining them financially, so forth. It also means maintaining the relationship. You know, I have a relationship with my father, and I'll add, he started listening to our Bhagavad Gita classes on YouTube, which is fantastic. So maybe he'll listen to this one day. But
We love you, Dad.
we love you. But we're not going to talk about Bhagavad Gita all day.
Right.
We're going to talk about the Blue Jays sometimes, and it's going to maintain the relationship. So it's my responsibility to assess, like, is that regulated, or am I just kind of like going into that mode and discussing it willy-nilly, right?
Mhm.
Is it for the sake of the relationship, or is it because I'm actually just feeding a desire to memorize the roster of the 1992 World Series winning Blue Jays of Toronto? Like, you know, you can trick yourself. You can get into one mode or another. It's like, you can use something for a higher purpose, or you can just be used by it. And that's going to come up again later too.
Mhm.
Right. Does that help? Or is that
I mean,
relevant?
I like understand my relationship to Pradap, but like I feel like that's a really relevant question for everybody in this group
Yeah.
that maybe they're not asking, or you know, because until you walked in the bhakti house tonight, or until, you know, whatever it may be, like probably you weren't talking about Krishna today.
I did.
There you go. And so there you go, like you
Yeah.
can bring it into these other places in tactful use, you know, ways that isn't necessarily quoting Shastra word by word, right? But like how to bring it into.
You can bring it in an expert way, and you can also try to control the level of the sound vibration. Like one thing I heard, which really impressed me one time, there's a devotee, but the habit I'm going to share with you wasn't necessarily that they were just talking about Krishna. They had this habit, or this personal idiosyncrasy, that anytime anybody complained about anything in front of them, their response would be, I'm just trying to be grateful.
Mm.
And then they would just go on with whatever else they were doing or talking about. They would not get sucked into complaining.
Mm.
You know? In fact, Raghunath Das, which one was it? Raghunath Bhatta Goswami, one of the 6 Goswamis, was famous for leaving the room if there was any criticism of any devotee. He would not hear it. Because he's a Goswami, he's on a very high level, one of the peers of Rupa Goswami. But just like recognizing that I don't actually have to subject myself to complaining, my own or that of others. I don't have to do that. I'm not obliged. I can change the channel if I don't like the result of that. If I don't like how I feel when I'm subjected to that energy, I can just change that channel. Like, I'm just trying to be grateful. Oh, can you believe this weather? Huh? Yeah, I'm just trying to be grateful. Like, how about that? How about just like deciding that instead of there's so many things we can complain about, right? So if one organically realizes that actually there's a lot of complaining energy in my words or in the words that I'm around, and I want to change that energy, whether it's at work or in this relationship with a person, or just like with my own inner speech, you can change that. You can start changing that energy and change the relationship. I'm just trying to be grateful. For example, it's like, maybe you don't have room to talk about the Nectar of Instruction, Bhagavad Gita, with a person, but maybe we can kind of like create boundaries.
Right.
Like I had to have that with a devotee actually recently, who they're going through some very challenging times, and they were messaging me about it, but they were in a very dark place around it. And I said, look, I care about you, and it hurts me to see you in that place. And so I don't want to enable that. So when you go into this place where you're stuck in like vindictiveness, because these awful things have happened to you and you're blaming and angry. I can't support that kind of talk with you anymore because I feel like I'm enabling you.
Mm.
And they're like, okay, I get it. And I won't come to you for like that kind of venting. And I appreciate your expression of care.
Mm.
I'm hoping that it purified things on their end. It definitely did for me, because I could see that I wasn't actually helping them anymore. I was just being like polluted by some really low, like angry energy. And hopefully they're going to get the help. I mean, I'm trying to support them. They're going to have to do the rest themselves to get help for their situation. But yeah.
Yeah, that's a great example. And I heard Kostuma say once that if people keep coming to me to complain rather than like, what does that say about me, that they think I'm someone who will listen to all their complaints,
Hmm.
right? And how to, like you just said, like how to not enable, but how to respectfully, politely, kindly, even if it's like, I'm just trying to be grateful. Like, I'm just yeah, and then setting boundaries.
Yeah.
Like
It's disarming, right? Imagine you're complaining and someone's like, yeah, I'm just trying to be grateful.
Mhm.
Like, oh yeah, I guess I should try that too. Permission granted.
Yeah, bring that to work. Bring that to work. Bring that to work.
Yeah. There's a lot to be upset about, especially in today's world. There's a lot of always bad news. And the 24-hour news cycle is guaranteed. It's created to keep you in a state of anxiety. So being grateful is like, takes effort, the way that the world is constructed now. So those are some thoughts on Prajalpa. There's more we could say. Let's see if there's any more reflections on it.
I mean, I have one.
Yeah.
Especially that last example you gave, I think something is stirring in me around how I'm doing that, because I think for me, I try to show up for a lot of people in my life in a way that is not coming from a place of like genuine care about the person. And like how you were mentioning, like how Kastua was saying, this person is coming to me and I'm seeing this trend.
Yeah.
And so like I'm struggling with that a little bit, in the sense of like, is this the thing that like changes everything about how I approach many of these conversations and these people, because I view that as a strength of mine. And also understanding like where my boundary is in that same place of that I don't have to subject myself to unnecessary conversation in a way that is also like protecting myself. So I really appreciated how you mentioned like this word of pollution in a way that doesn't feel like negative of sorts, and you're not giving that to the other person, like you're not putting it on them. You're like, this is what I'm saying about myself and my experience, versus making it about them. Because I feel like hearing all this conversation, I'm like, oh, I'm already thinking about what the other person's going to say. If I say, oh, I'm just really grateful today, like, you know, like that sort of thing, I'm already trying to forecast someone else's response when they're in a place that isn't in that same place. So it's really interesting to think about, you know, how I contribute to that while also not thinking that that is an unnecessary conversation. But I've been so subjected to that I'm so used to thinking it is necessary, and it's not.
Yeah. Sometimes we don't really know what is necessary until we have an alternative.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So in many ways, the Krishna consciousness movement is basically providing, its mission is to provide people with the experience of what a higher alternative is for the activities of human life, activities of hearing, activities of eating, activities of singing, activities of study, of music. And because we couldn't guess that. I could never have guessed that I would enjoy discussing spiritual philosophy like this. I could never have understood that until I did it myself. Like, you have to actually have that experience. So at the core of this instruction is that anything that's not related to our Krishna consciousness is ultimately some level of temporarily necessary, but not eternally necessary, you know? And the only way you can really realize that fact without it just being like a weird kind of almost fanatical idea is we actually have to experience that pure vibration in our lives. If it's not 24 hours a day, and it isn't, for myself included. It should be at some point, ideally every day, because if you don't do something every day, you forget about it really easily. So that's why if you can have like some good japa every day, some good hearing, or like listen to a podcast or a recording of a book or a class or something every day of that pure vibration, you will feel what that's like. Especially if you're present with it, right? You're not trying to multitask. Then when you do the other stuff you have to do. It's like no one's saying don't do those things. Do the things you have to do, but you'll realize what you're capable of, what you're actually able to experience, what the higher vibration is, and what actually isn't necessary anymore. Just like our standard for what we keep in our possession changes and simplifies when we start practicing Krishna consciousness, our standard for what we put in our ears purifies as well. And it's just natural. And it also rubs off on the people around us, is that we start to become a source of upliftment and of higher vibration and advice, perhaps, and wisdom.
Right, and they either accept that and want that and welcome that, or they fall away, because it's either confronting or like, uplifting. And that, Caitlin, what you were saying, what you were sharing around like forecasting what the response would be to saying like to not just being an open place for someone to dump on you, right? In many ways, right? It's part of your service, you're empathic, you hold space and you listen. And I can relate to in that it's a pattern of codependency and people pleasing. Being like, I can't set a boundary because it's gonna make someone not like me, or like they're gonna feel like they can't come to me, even though I don't really want them to, but I want them to, right? It's like that conundrum that's there. So it's like, okay, what is actual truth? Like Shami was saying here, like what are my needs and what boundary I need to set? And maybe it isn't just, maybe it's I'm trying to be grateful. I know someone who used to say, it was something like every day above ground is a good day. You would probably know him. He was that dealer.
Oh.
Yeah, but like he just would say that rather than listening to people complain in the corporate world. Every day above ground is a good day. Like I'm just grateful to be alive. And so we can find our own ways of doing it. But like, Shami and I have different personalities and whatnot. So like he can say that. I'm like, how did you say that? It's so amazing. Like I can never say that. But I could say something that is getting to the same point, but in a different way, and it would honor me. Right. So like you find your way within that. Whereas like I say I have a lot more fluff. Shami just gets to the point. Right. So, but that's me. Right. And that's him. And then there's gonna be your way. But it is also that piece of there of like to not choose them over you, but to choose. You've said something, Shami, before of something of like, oh, how do you say that? It's not about, it's like about both of us being heard. I guess it might be in touch, similar to what you were talking about, the debate, but it's about.
The mode of goodness, you matter, as do I.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mode of ignorance, I don't matter. I'm not important. You are.
Yeah.
Mode of passion, I matter and you don't. The mode of goodness is you matter, as do I.
As do I.
And that word I was looking for earlier was quota.
Oh,
It has a
quota. Yeah.
Yeah. It's even used, Prabhupada uses that word in the Isha Upanishad. Everyone has their quota that's set aside for them.
Right.
And when you're operating under your quota, it's not a problem. Yeah. So I appreciate like, when I was in Toronto in the early 2010s, I was distributing Bhagavad Gita's and other books on the street and inviting people to our yoga bhakti center. And I was with a devotee named Katamrita, and Corey knows her because she's in New Zealand now. And I would like distribute books one after the other, and I would see she'd be talking to the same people for like long stretches of time and not distributing as many books. And I thought like she wasn't doing it right for a while in my own like little narrow view, but she's a different person than me. And what I realized from hanging out like just within earshot is she would do a lot more listening than I would do, and a lot more kind of like gauging where they were in the world and making them feel heard and cared for. And she would definitely give them like an invitation and explain what we're doing and here's a book and different things. But there was more quality and less quantity. Is it better or worse? It was her. It's just who she was, And I still remember that because I couldn't do that. I learned how to do that more later, but I still can't do it the same because it's just not who I am. But I can do other things, and it's like that's all right. But she used her nature in Krishna's service, and I used my nature in Krishna's service. And so the point is Krishna's service. It's like she wasn't just sitting there talking, like chatting up about the weather with these people. She would listen to them to some degree about what's happening in their lives, and then she would steer the conversation towards spiritual solutions and spiritual sangha, and make them feel cared for and listened to. And she would consistently bring people to the center with that approach, even though she talked to like 1/3 or 1/5 of the people I did. And it's just like, it worked. That's who she was. She was someone who built bridges. And so, knowing yourself and then finding like how you can plug that into service is a very valuable thing.
And if those people don't want to hear the spiritual wisdom that you have to give, they'll stop coming to you to complain.
Right.
Yeah. Who else? There's gotta be another reflection.
One point that comes up with Bhaktivinoda Thakur's commentary is that sometimes when you're talking about bhakti philosophy, you have to criticize. You have to criticize like the material society, or even like you have to point the finger at certain persons and say like that way of behavior is not really in line with our thing. Is like ideally you're not pointing at individuals, but sometimes it may be necessary. But if it's really from a pure place of wanting to create understanding or asking like sincere questions for the purpose of supporting one's own bhakti practice, that's also not prajalpa. It's bona fide, because we have to actually understand how to apply. On the other hand, if you're talking about others while influenced by envy, aversion, pride, some sense of false prestige or personal distinction, that's not helpful, and it is prajalpa. So those are ways to distinguish. Any more? Yeah, let's just take any comments, questions, reflections on anything. Corey says need to run. Got to get to the airport so I can get back to Amanda. Great seeing you all online this week. Hare Krishna. Jai. Any comments, questions, reflections on today's talk? The first three points of verse 2. So that's overeating or over collecting, over endeavoring or endeavoring for mundane things, and prajalpa, useless, whimsical speech.
I mean, I think it's like I'm sitting with my daughter right here who's like just aching to go home. So like, I don't want to take that time, but the reality is like, when you said, you were like talking about like the higher vibration and like knowing what that feels like and knowing just how you're in that experience. Like, honestly, that has been the hardest part about me coming back from India. I have really struggled being back here, really struggled with it because you don't get to experience that level of high vibration in life and in my job. I don't have the pleasure of working in a field where I'm surrounded by people who are higher vibration. And so that has been really hard.
Yeah.
Really, really hard. And I think, and I try to return to it as much as I can every day. But like my question, I guess, is like, I always ask the practical questions. How do we tap into that? How can we find it? How can we tap into it when we're, around people who are not in that level? And it's just a lot of like, it is. It's like all the time. I mean, I work in education. I just, it's a lot.
I'll tell you what, my guru's sangha, they're based in kind of Silicon Valley area, and they're all householders. They're all professionally, engaged, and usually like in IT and different things like that in Silicon Valley. And so there's a lot of just talking about dollars and cents and whatever IT stuff, software, hardware, whatever. I couldn't care less about, but that's the center of the world for all that. But they're also extremely advanced. One thing they started doing they had like weekly or then eventually daily morning group calls. They would like read together and discuss for like 20 minutes or something every morning among the Sangha devotees. They would read some section and then they would like share like a reflection for 20 minutes before they start their work day, to kind of front load their day with some of that sound vibration, because they have to go to work, and they do. That's the thing, is that they all do these jobs, which are extremely like well paying, but also very demanding and definitely corporate jobs. They do them really well. But they front load their day with some sound vibration. And so like what I'm hearing from you is that the aspect of Sangha and the sound vibration is what you're missing, because you had the experience of like full immersion.
Yeah.
And all my Sangha, all the sound vibration is like super high. It's like, okay, get taken out of that. Like now it's just like, I'm in a desert. Okay, so get a drink before you walk into the desert. And then it'll keep you going till you get back.
Yeah.
And the other thing is pray and ask for that more of that in your life. But these places, and either this place physically, but also this Sangha we've created around Nectar of Instruction, these are little oases that Prabhupada has given us and the Acharyas have given us. Rupa Goswami, when he was sitting in Terkadamba at Vrindavan writing this book, he was thinking about all of us in the desert of the material world. And he didn't know what exactly your situation would be like, but he knew what it's like to be devoid of that vibration, because he also had that. He was extremely successful. He was a servant to the basically the emperor of Bengal, and he felt circumstantially obliged to serve in that place, even though his heart was moving more and more to Krishna. So he knew what it was like to work a job that was not in alignment with his spiritual interests. But he didn't leave it all of a sudden. He did have like a strong morning practice, and there's more we can say about what he did, but pretty much just front load your day and take advantage of the Sangha when you can, because it's not just you, it's actually everybody.
Yeah, right.
It's like a near universal, comment or experience. What to speak when you get dunked in, Vrindavan and come back.
In the Ganga.
That's the point.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
You're in for it though. That's a gift. It's a gift to miss that.
Mhm. Yeah, and that and you are front loading your day, and
A
you're
lot.
still like really missing it, and it's like the association, and everybody is in that, and it's like everybody's in that energy and that higher vibration. It's like,
Yeah.
so whether you want it or not, you're getting swept up in it. It's like not a choice,
Right,
really.
right.
Like you chose it before you went, and even like reaching out to other people in this group, and saying like, hey, do you want to just talk about our reflections from the reading this week? Or like, you having like sub groups within the group, and connecting with people who, are actually interested in talking about this stuff, and saying, hey, I need more association. What are you doing tonight? What are you doing tomorrow? Like, want to walk and talk about, or you want to sit and read Krishna book? Like, in a way that it's not weird in our Sangha. And so even beyond our like formal things that we're doing, which we want to expand and do more and more and more, and eventually have we're talking about having one day a week where we do a morning program here and anyone can come, and so it's also a reminder and an invitation to do more and expand more.
Yeah, we can find creative ways to support that.
Right. And it's not easy. It's really not easy. And it's also a beautiful thing to have that longing and desire, right? To want it that bad. And that you now notice when you don't have it, when that used to just be the mode.
Yeah.
So there's like gratitude in that, and there's also like, how can we bring India here more and more and more?
Mm-hmm.
The mood of India, I would say. Mood of
Bhakti.
bhakti.
Yeah. And that's an open question I'll leave with everybody with. If you have any ideas on how to creatively spiritualize your lives and interconnect among the Sangha, like by all means bring it on the WhatsApp or talk to us in private about it. I think it's fantastic. Because the homework is personal application from the first 3 verses. Pick at least one: atyahara, overeating or over collecting; prayasa, over endeavor; and prajalpa, speaking mundane things. and talk about what it means for you to what your relationship with that activity is, and or which way it can go, which way you'd like to take that relationship. Personal application.
And then the reading.
And the reading is we'll just say the whole first purport, the purport to verse 2.
Okay.
That way it'll cover the first 3 things and you'll be ready for next week too. Next week, we're going to touch on one of my favorite topics in all of the Nectar of Instruction, Niyamagraha and Niyamagraha, the 2-for-1 item, because I just think it's, oh man, as soon as I started to really think about that item, I realized how many things in the history of especially spirituality have basically been one form of Niyamagraha or Niyamagraha, like being too attached to the rules and regulations or abandoning the rules and regulations whimsically. So we'll explore that, and I can't wait, because it's got a ton of societal application and a ton of personal application. It's like he's saying don't be a fanatic liberal or a fanatic conservative, basically, and we'll break that down. Stay tuned. Coming attractions.
And next week, we're gonna be in Toronto. We're going to visit Shamia's family. But you guys can come, anyone who wants to come to the Bhakti House Live can. But we will not physically be here. We'll be on the Zoom.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Any other comments or questions before we call it a night? Jai.
Hare Krishna.
Glories to our online Sangha and YouTube listeners. Okay. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Shri Rupa Goswami ki jai, Shri Krishna Chaitanya Mahaprabhu ki jai. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Thank you very much, everyone. See you next week.